Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to this committee. This feels like a watershed moment for sport, particularly gymnastics. When you think of gymnasts, picture little children, 6 to 8 years old, starting their competitive journeys, training 20 to 30 hours every week, oftentimes spending more time with their coaches than their parents. These are the profoundly vulnerable little humans entrusted to coaches who promise to teach them to flip and fly. These are the children I speak for today, and for whom we call upon this government and this committee to enact a judicial inquiry into human rights violations against athletes and a lack of mechanisms protecting children in Canada. As a former gymnast myself and mother of a former gymnast, I know the beauty and the potential benefits that sport offers if delivered with an ethic of care and a child-centric approach. However, the hundreds of reports we have received and arrests made in the last 7 months alone confirm our worst fears. Gymnastics is rotting from the top down and the bottom up. I wonder how many of you would choose gymnastics for yourself or your own child if you knew what we do. When you were a child, would you have chosen to repeatedly feel your physical safety was threatened by an adult bullying you to do dangerous skills that you knew could result in catastrophic injury? How many of you experienced a trusted coach pressing your legs into oversplits while you sobbed and begged for them to stop? But they just screamed at you to shut up. Who here has spent the prime of their life with their face stuck in a toilet bowl, throwing up every meal? Who obsessively weighed themselves or were force-fed in hospital to treat an eating disorder? All the while, the soundtrack in your head repeated, "You're fat, you're too ugly to be a gymnast, you look like the Pillsbury Doughboy." How many of you have experienced the confusion, nausea, and panic when a trusted adult suddenly says, "I want to touch you"? Or had to choose between the safe haven of your sexually abusive male coach just to be spared from the outright cruelty of your female coach? Have any of you lived in chronic pain since adolescence? Or self-harmed because the voice in your head said, and maybe still does, "You're worthless, useless, lazy"? Lastly, imagine spending thousands of dollars on therapy just to become a functioning member of society. Our Gymnasts for Change team is here today. My friends, how many of us can relate to these examples? Stay standing, team. If the pain, misery, and fear that you endured as a child athlete was worth the medals that you won. This is a reality for many child gymnasts in Canada. Violence, degradation, humiliation, and some of the worst abuse you can imagine. Yet still, there is no plan for prevention. And let's remember, the lack of diversity in gymnastics means these are often the very most privileged children in our communities. If we can't even keep them safe, what does this mean for kids who are racialized, transgender, or have a disability? Children These children who are exponentially more vulnerable to maltreatment because of intersecting systems of oppression. As awful as these examples of abuse are, survivors tell us time and time again that what haunts them the most was not being protected by the athletes who had the power to do something, by the adults who had the power to do something, who instead chose to protect their friends and protect the brand. Gymnasts for Change Canada was a movement we hoped we'd never have to start. Collectively, we believe that if we informed the provincial governing bodies, Gymnastics Canada, and as a last resort, Sport Canada, then somebody, anybody, would listen to us. They would act with haste to protect athletes. But we were wrong. 9 other countries have already completed independent investigations into their gymnastics programs. They're 2 years ahead of Canada with efforts to dismantle these cultures of cruelty, with legislative change and binding mechanisms that protect athletes' human rights. Let me be very clear. What we're discussing today is not a sport crisis. It is a human rights crisis happening in sport. Canada needs leaders with strong moral courage who will call for a national judicial inquiry to uncover a past that must never be repeated and to generate solutions that have never existed. The time for bold and brave action is now. Every child in Canada deserves to enjoy sport and grow up to be a better person because of their sport experience, not despite it. I ask this committee, how can we continue to hear these stories and not act? Thank you so much.